92 of the CRICKETher Weekly. We have just watched England beat New Zealand by 8 wickets in their final group stage match, and it's quite early in the day still, partly because it was a daytime game. I think that's the only daytime game of the whole tournament, which is quite interesting, and obviously that did mean that England struggled a little bit. I think that was the reason they struggled a little bit with the ball early on.
Well, they had to get up too early. It was like, oh, we haven't had our coffee yet.
That wasn't, no, we had to get up early. We had to get up at 5 a.m. It was a perfectly reasonable time in India. No, I was more thinking about the sweat, Sid. Sweat on the ball. I think that was one of the reasons why Lindsay Smith struggled. But anyway, New Zealand did not cover themselves in glory with the bat after a good start, and it was fairly easy pickings for England in the end. Of course, that shouldn't overshadow the fact that it was Sophie Devine's last game, and we will talk about Sophie Devine in a minute. But Sid, just how important was it for England to go into their semi-final against South Africa on Wednesday with a win here?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose in some ways the win wasn't important in the sense that it didn't really change the semi-final outcome. So England were always going into this game going to play a semi-final against South Africa. The one significant thing about winning is it means that England finished second in the group. So if England had lost, they'd have finished third in the group. Why is that important? Well, England play South Africa, who were the other one. So if South Africa finished third and England finished second, which is what happened, that means that if the semi-final is rained off, then England will progress to the final. Now, there are 2 days available to play this semi-final. So there's a day and there's a reserve day. The weather on the day is not looking great. The weather on the reserve day is not looking great either. So
in fact, the reserve day is looking even worse than the actual match day.
Well, yeah, the chances of rain on the reserve day go up to a high of 72%. They do also go slightly lower at some of the lower, but there are no hours of potential play on either the match day or the reserve day. 19% chance of rain is as low as it goes. There are no 0% chance of rain hours. So,
okay, well, we'll just have to
England
see what
could turn
happens.
out to have done very well.
I mean, England have been bitten by rain before in a semi-final, haven't they? Cue memories of Australia and Sydney in 2020, and that was actually because England had lost to South Africa earlier in the group, and then therefore India progressed. And England did not, because India finished higher in the group.
So England got to be beaten by Australia at the MCG.
India
got to be beaten at the MCG rather than England. So, you know.
We don't know what would have happened, Sid, okay? You can't go through all the what ifs. Anyways, I wonder if somebody like Heather Knight would have been very conscious of that. And actually she was asked about it afterwards and she said, yeah, I am conscious of the weather. Whereas Amy Jones seemed a little bit less like she was bothered about that. But then I suppose that's the difference between being a former captain and not being in the kind of current leadership group as well, which Amy Jones isn't. As you wrote, Sid, even though England did win, they weren't exactly convincing, were they?
No, they didn't actually bowl very well. So far in this tournament, it's been the bowling that's kind of saved them, hasn't it? And their batting has been very mediocre, as I wrote in my piece, as mediocre as a middle-aged white man on a committee.
It's a great line. Today, I'm sure some of our viewers will appreciate that line.
Today it was the bowling that just didn't really hold up. There were just like a lot of bad balls. Yeah. And New Zealand took advantage of those bad balls to generally hammer them down the throats of fielders. So, you know, it basically was like, you know, England bowl a bad ball, New Zealand send it straight to a fielder. And
not for the first 10 overs.
It was not a Great game. Well, Susie Bates did it during the first 10 overs.
Okay, that's true.
But
other than,
it was probably the worst shot of the entire game.
Okay. I do feel New Zealand have been a little bit unlucky this tournament. They've been on the wrong end of the rain twice in what should have been 2 of their easier games, which means that they've ultimately finished in 6th place in the table. There is still one match going on, but I don't think that it's going to affect the standing of New Zealand. So they've actually finished behind Sri Lanka in this tournament because of those 2 washouts in Colombo. It does feel a little bit like the weather has made their campaign a bit stop-start as well. I think that's very difficult when you're getting yourself in a winning position and then the match doesn't conclude, and whereas it feels to me like England have been on the right side of the rain, for example in the Pakistan game, that they almost certainly would have lost.
Yeah, New Zealand, there's no doubt that New Zealand were really unlucky. I mean, it was possible going into today, although obviously no longer possible, but possible going into today that New Zealand could have ended up losing the same number of games as India. In fact, losing fewer games than India, potentially. If India had lost today, New Zealand could have lost fewer games than India, but India go through because India won more games, and it's games won that takes precedence over net run rate. So, New Zealand had those two, easy games. Tell that to England, as you mentioned, nearly lost to Pakistan.
Yeah.
But, you'd have expected New Zealand to take the points from those games.
Yeah.
And, then they could have been in a very different position. And if they'd been in a position today, coming into today's match, where they could have still qualified, then maybe we see a different New Zealand come out there. It always is, the players will deny this, but it's hard to get yourself up for a match when it all feels slightly flat, when you're disappointed, because you know that you're already out. And that's just the way it is. England have been fortunate. New Zealand have definitely been very unfortunate to have those two washouts of their, in theory, easier games.
It did feel like today wasn't a wholly dead rubber though, because of it being Sophie Devine's final ODI. It was really interesting to hear her post-match sort of reflecting on that actually. And on the one hand, she said, it was really disappointing and I wanted to go out on a high. But she did then sort of say, but actually there was still that kind of enormous sense of fun and of just remembering that what this has all been about for me for the last 19 years has actually being able to go out there and kind of represent my country and play alongside some of my best friends, and I was still able to do that today. She said something interesting about almost like manipulating it right at the end so that she was bowling at one end and Susie Bates was at the other. I think that was a joke. I don't think that she would have done that entirely just based on good times for old mates, but it was a sort of nice touch, and also a nice moment where she took the wicket of Heather Knight, and instead of reviewing, Heather just went, yeah, it's a fair cop, and here's your 111th or 100 and something ODI wicket, you're welcome, Soph, and walked off. Now England had basically won by that point. It was fairly academic, but there was a little bit of a nod to some sentiment and some emotion there, and I just think that for a player of Sophie Devine's longevity, that's okay. And I've said this on this podcast numerous times, but I love Sophie Devine. She's my favourite player.
Yeah, and you have to bear in mind that she's from that different era, from that era that Lottie was talking about at the beginning of the tournament, where people played because they loved it. Sophie Devine used to come to England over New Zealand's winters and play county cricket and sleep on people's sofas in order to be able to just be there.
Yeah.
And you'd sleep on someone's sofa for a week. You only ever played on Sundays because that was when county cricket happened, because a lot of the players had day jobs. So you'd come over to play 8 or 9 county championship matches and to spend the summer just kind of just being part of cricket and doing your best, even though you perhaps had a couple of training sessions if you were lucky. You may do a little bit of coaching, make a little bit of money from coaching, but essentially you're couch surfing in order to play cricket because they loved it. And a little bit of that still remains with Sophie Devine, and that's something that the next generation are never quite going to experience. No. And I sort of feel you have lost a little bit from that. The players deserve professionalism, of course they do, but it doesn't half build some characters. The fact that these people had to go to so much effort for so long, to play the game that they love.
Absolutely, and we had some really nice encounters with Sophie Devine kind of early on in the CRICKETher days. I remember the KSL launch party, which was in this kind of basement pub or basement bar in Manchester. And a couple of the players were a bit grumpy with us because we were doing a quiz and it was what's your favourite Nando's, which was the kind
we asked them a load of silly questions.
Yeah, but one of them was what's your favourite Nando's, because that was the in thing that all county cricketers were eating at that time.
Because it was healthy, because it was chicken.
Yeah.
So they'd be like, well, I eat Nando's because it's healthy.
I eat my Nando's and then I eat my fries and my... Anyway, and And she just laughed and said, "I don't eat Nando's, I'm an elite athlete," or something like that. But she took it in the right spirit. And there was another occasion, wasn't there, when we went to see a Berkshire game?
Yeah, I remember her coming over, and it was the first time we'd seen her that summer. And again, she was, just over couch surfing, playing for nothing. And she came down to play with Warwickshire against Berkshire. And we just ran into her before the game, and she came over to us, and she was like, "Oh, this is just after we'd started the website," and said, "Oh, it's really great that you started the website. Everyone in New Zealand's reading it so they can find out what's happening with county cricket. Well, we're over on the other side of the world, because there used to be nobody else reporting on county cricket. There was no Reporters Network. There was no regular articles in the Cricketer.
There were no YouTube live streams.
Yeah,
it was a handful of match reports from Women's Cricket Blog and us, and that was what you got. So,
yeah.
But that was
Don Miles doing his photographs, and that was all you knew about it.
That was such a big compliment, and it really gave us.
There was a little bit of belief going forward that we were doing something useful, because at that time we were we were getting 50 people reading our match report, and
Yeah, and to know that some of them were New Zealand cricketers, that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
And this summed up Sophie Devine for me. In her post-match, she was thanking everybody. She's thanking her friends, family, teammates. She thanked the media. And of which, I very much consider myself part, and obviously you as well. And given the kind of quite fraught relationship that we've had with the England team over the last 12 months, and some of the England management / former management, to actually hear a player actually be like, thanks for showing up to cover my games, that's such a nice sentiment, and really for that to come out of the mouth of Sophie Devine, I just love her even more. Yeah. Okay. Shall we move on from my fangirl moment, Sid? England playing in their semi-final against South Africa then on Wednesday, by virtue of the fact that Australia did not just beat South Africa yesterday or on Saturday, they absolutely hammered them, didn't they? And Sid, I think this is quite funny, because you've said a couple of times on the CRICKETher Weekly now that South Africa getting bowled out for 69 in that first group match against England was just a blip, an aberration. Well, I'm afraid I have to break it to you. It was not a blip or an aberration, because South Africa were bowled out for under 100 by Australia yesterday. And obviously we have to mention Alana King, who took 7 wickets and returned one of the best spells of bowling ever in a Women's Cricket World Cup. Fantastic performance from her. What did you make of it?
Well, we were chatting before the game, and we kind of predicted that maybe this would be a good game to lose, because if you win this game, then you're going to get India in the semi-final, and India are the big risk team, I think, especially the last game. We saw their last game. Smriti's finally hit some form. Pratika also hit a century.
Yeah.
They're suddenly looking like they actually could pull this out of the bag
in front of what's going to be a big home crowd, you would imagine.
So that's potentially going to be a banana skin squared. Whereas if you lose that game, you get England, who have been pretty mediocre. So, speculating that it could be a good game to lose. Australia did not agree. Australia, this is not a good game to lose. We will not lose this game. And, they absolutely didn't. And South Africa did, again, fall to pieces a bit. I suppose that, it's not quite as bad. It is closer to 100 this time than 50. But, they're obviously very, mercurial. They obviously have it in them to win some big games. Thinking back to that T20 World Cup last year and then beating Australia in the semi-final. But equally, they have it in them to collapse in a heap. It's going to be really interesting to see what happens with them in England. Certainly.
It's kind of which South Africa are going to turn up, because a couple of people have messaged me saying, "Oh, well, clearly England are going to win that." And I know you've said that you think that England are going to win that, and it's going to be potentially a bit of a repeat of 2017. But I don't know. I just think no, you can't predict
England definitely, obviously, they won't be taking it for granted. They'll know that, because they know enough about South Africa to know that these are good players, and that there are enough decent players in that South African team that individually can take a game away from you.
It's just that on paper now it looks like England will make the final, but cricket's not played on paper, etc., etc. And one question, Sid, that has arisen, and a few people have sort of speculated about this now, is that, well, Alana King was so successful against South Africa, so surely England have got to bring in Sarah Glenn for this semi-final. By which I say, well, have you actually watched Sarah Glenn bowl? Because Sarah Glenn and Alana King are both categorised officially as leg spinners. The difference is that one of them absolutely rips and fizzes it and actually, turns the ball, and the other does not. And so there is no way that England are going to bring in Sarah Glenn for the semi-final.
I don't think so, particularly. I mean, Sarah Glenn obviously does have a leg spinner's action, but she doesn't turn the ball, left or right, or she's still a decent bowler. I don't want to put her down.
No, it's not about that. It's about going, well, they're not going to throw somebody in for the semi-final. I mean, she has played one match this tournament, but we saw England have Danny White-Hodge playing today, presumably because they want her now to play the semi-final and final in place of Emma Lamb, and they actually wanted her to get the chance to have a match beforehand, because you can't throw somebody in at the knockouts when they've not played in the group stages. That's just not fair.
It's not ideal, no, yeah. So definitely,
it's not ideal even
but
because she's only
them...
faced 7 balls in the whole tournament. But that probably wouldn't have been what England predicted before facing New Zealand today. Anyway, sorry, I interrupted.
Yeah, no, I can't see them bringing in Sarah Glenn, because they'll know that. They'll know that Sarah Glenn doesn't, get that big turn that an Amelia Kerr or an Alana King or an Amanda J. Wellington does. She's got a lot of other skills, and she's very, very reliable. She'll put the ball on a sixpence. She's very much a control bowler.
Yeah.
She's very in control of her game, so she knows where the ball's going to land, and she can do some tricks with changes of pace and some top spin to get the ball to fizz through. There's lots of good stuff there, but she's not going to get that side-to-side movement that some of the others get, and that proved so tough for South Africa. So, I can't see them changing up the spin unit, even though Lindsay Smith did have quite a tough game today. I mean, I guess the positive from Lindsay Smith today is that she did have like a little bit of does this thing occasionally where she almost gets the yips in the middle of a game, but she did actually come back from that, and that was actually really positive. I mean, England were a little bit desperate today because Sophie Eccleston went off injured, and England really, really, really don't want that Siva bowling 10 overs.
No, that was
we saw
very
Sophia
obvious
Dunkley
today.
actually, bowl a couple of overs,
which is just a bit bonkers. And then Nat was asked about it after the game, and she said, "Oh, well, she's been bowling a bit in the nets." Well, it's news to me. It's probably news to Surrey as well, given that she bowled 2 overs in the entire domestic season. But yeah, not ideal. My reading of the Eccleston situation is very much that she wasn't brought back today, or having bowled only those 4 balls as a precautionary measure, because it wasn't a must-win game, and they are already in the semi-final, and they want her to be fit for the semi-final. Now, people are being a bit cautious, or England, the ECB, being a bit cautious about saying, "Oh yes, she'll definitely be fine for the semi-final," but I feel like 95% confident that she will be. There were some images of her on the TV sitting in the dugout looking okay. She was icing her shoulder, but she's not dislocated anything. She's not broken anything, because otherwise she would have been on her way to hospital, and she also would have looked in a lot more pain when they actually showed those TV images. So that's my reading of the situation right now.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be surprised if England don't send her for a scan, because why wouldn't you send her for a scan? And that might uncover something potentially.
Why wouldn't you? Because you want her to play in the semi-final.
Well, I guess there's an argument that we won't send her for a scan because we don't want to find out if she's got a hairline fracture.
I don't want to imply that. I don't want to imply that. I know that they would. I know that they take player welfare very seriously. But I'm just saying that all of the body language and everything else around it. So they may send her for a scan, but I just think it looks very likely that she'll be fine for the semi-final.
Okay.
Now, Sid, we have to revise our predictions. Because, well, I certainly have to revise mine. I can't remember what yours were. I think you agreed with me, though, that we said it would be an Australia v India final. Now, if they play each other in the semi-final, they can't also play each other in the final. I have got that right, haven't I, Sid?
You have, yeah.
Okay, good. Right, so revised predictions then. My revised prediction is that England will beat South Africa, Australia will beat India, and we'll see a repeat of the last 50 over World Cup final. and Australia will win. By the time we record this next week, we're going to record after the final.
We'll know the answer, I guess.
We will know the answer. So there we go. So that's my revised prediction. Over to you.
I think we're going to see a repeat of 2017.
Okay.
That's my prediction. I think that India will beat Australia in the semi-final. I think that, India, if they have, the right game in the right circumstances, they are the only side that are capable of beating this Australia side. I think India can pull it out of the bag in the semi-final. I think then there'll be enormous, huge, unbelievable levels of pressure on India in the final. I think that India will suddenly go women's cricket mad, and the pressure will be too much, and that England will fall away in the final, and England will win the World Cup. They don't deserve to win the World Cup, but I think they will.
Okay, but for me, that you've put the nail on the head there, actually, which is that of the 4 semi-finalists, in my opinion, it's very boring and it's very irritating, but the only one of those 4 teams who deserve to win a World Cup are Australia. Australia have had their moments this World Cup where they haven't been 100% convincing, but they've always managed to dig themselves out. It feels to me a little bit like England have kind of fluked themselves a bit into this position, partly by virtue of being very lucky against Pakistan. They've been dreadful with the bat at times. They weren't particularly good with the ball today, despite being much more convincing with the bat. And so I just feel like they don't really deserve to win a World Cup. South Africa have been bowled out twice for under 100, which is just kind of unforgivable in professional 21st century women's cricket, sorry. And India have just been really inconsistent, desperately so, to the extent that they were having to fight tooth and nail to even make the semi-finals. And I know they came out on the wrong side of a very tight clash against South Africa, but they completely choked against England. And so for me, the only one of those 4 teams who deserves to go home with silverware is Australia.
Yeah, but if India pull it out of the bag against Australia in the semi-final, then at that point they probably will deserve to win it. But whether they will or not, with the huge pressure from the media that there will then be.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be. I think India winning this World Cup would be really good news for women's cricket. And we can maybe talk a bit more about the kind of the tournament as a whole next week. Although we did have a question come in from Graham. Where are the spectators? World Cup games played in near empty stadiums do nothing for the women's game, which has sort of caused me to reflect a little bit on the tournament as a whole and kind of whether it's been transformational. Now, I think the jury's out a little bit and we have to wait and see what happens in the semi-finals and final.
Yeah, there's no doubt that if India qualify for the final, then the Indian public will go women's cricket mad overnight.
Yeah, but it does feel
as
like...
will the media and...
It does,
the volume will get turned up to 11, but at the moment
it just feels a little bit like the crowds have been a bit disappointing. They actually right at the start of the elements of the tournament in Colombo, they started saying, oh no, we're not even going to sell tickets, we're just going to let people in for free, which gives you an indication of kind of the level of interest. And of course, people don't turn up when it's peeing it down with rain to watch cricket, unsurprisingly. So the crowds in Colombo have been desperately disappointing. I'm not convinced they've been that much better in India, other than a few games where India have played the big sides. So Australia and England, I think, were both sellouts. Now, sellouts may be slightly in inverted commas when you actually looked at the ground.
Yeah, there were a lot of empty seats. I think one of the things that we know for certain, because we've seen it so many times across so many women's sport in particular, is that if you virtually give away tickets, if you sell tickets for £1, a lot of people buy them and then don't turn up because there's no loss from not turning up. You don't lose, you go, well, we paid £3 for those tickets, and the kid's feeling a bit snivelly, and actually I've got a long commute to do tomorrow, I don't feel like it. Whereas if you paid £50 for your family, I mean, the tickets for the T20 World Cup next summer, the cheapest tickets are for adults are £15, which means for a family you'll pay about £50, say, for a family of 4. At that point you go, well, we've actually paid for real money for this, we're not going to miss it.
Yeah.
Whereas if you paid £3, you might go, oh, I can't be bothered. And I think that's a little bit of what we're seeing there. So we're seeing, in games that are in theory sold out, we're seeing an awful lot of empty seats, and we know that they sold these tickets for, quite low amounts, a pretty nominal amount, as well as giving them away in Sri Lanka. I mean, it's disappointing for Sri Lanka because, they were playing games at home and just nobody watching, and
Yeah, so it all just feels like it's been a little bit underwhelming, but maybe that's a theme we can kind of return to this time next week, Sid. Graham did have one other question, which was about the umpiring. Why is no one commenting on the dire umpiring, both on and off field? He says, as an example, I would guess at least 50% of the LBW decisions, both out and not out, are proved to be wrong. More experienced umpires are needed. It's a World Cup, for goodness sake. Now, we have talked about this in previous episodes about the kind of quality of the umpiring, so we don't necessarily want to completely rehash that. What I will say is at this point, that my understanding is what happens at this point of the tournament is for the semi-finals and final, the ICC then appoint the best umpires from the earlier group stages of the tournament.
Well, so and neutral umpires as well.
Yeah.
So if England get to the final, that means that C. Redfern isn't going to umpire the final, for example.
Yeah, that's true. But they will do their best, I would have thought, to have the most experienced umpires and the people who have done the best umpiring in these conditions at these grounds in place for the semi-finals and final. But that does not detract from the fact that the group stage umpiring has not been brilliant.
I mean, I think that, as you say, you're not hearing people criticise it. I mean, it's worth bearing in mind that if you're watching the TV feed, that TV feed is run by the ICC. The commentators are all paid by the ICC. So, they're all effectively ICC employees for the duration of this tournament.
Can I say, though, as...
If you listen to the radio, the BBC commentary, which Raf has been part of... That was
what I was about to say, yeah. I just wanted to say, as somebody who's done radio commentary... even though the BBC commentary was going out as part of the live feed on the ICC website, so it was going out globally, we were not given any kind of steer, and certainly I criticised a few umpiring decisions on air, and I know other people did as well. I think criticising decisions is a bit different to pointing the finger at specific umpires, and I think that it's more acceptable to do the former than the latter, because I don't think that it's not about individuals and having a go at them. It's about the structures and the way in which the kind of appointments have been done by ICC. They're the ones who are kind of responsible for that. If somebody asks me to stand to kind of officiate in a World Cup and says, I think that you're capable of doing that, then I'm going to go, okay, well, maybe I'm a bit nervous, but I'll have a go. And I just think we need to avoid being very critical of individuals. I don't think that's helpful. But I think it has been a bit of a talking point, and hopefully, the ICC will respond to that.
And we need to build experience in our umpires. We need to, if we're going to appoint all female panels for World Cups going forwards, then actually it will be helpful to say to the countries, appoint female umpires to your international matches, because that's going to give them the experience, and to have umpires here from countries where they're coming in and they've umpired like 10 games, and that's by the end of the World Cup. The umpires today in England's game had less than 20 games between the two on-field umpires.
Yeah,
that's because they're not being given opportunities by their boards, because their boards are giving those opportunities to men when they have bilateral series to play.
Can I say, though, that I think one of the difficulties with that is that DRS is not frequently in use in many of these bilateral series, because it's very expensive, and not all boards are routinely using it for bilateral women's series.
Yeah, it's easy for us to be complacent as English people, because almost all of our series now do have that.
Yeah, but only for the last couple of years. It's very recent, so it's quite difficult as an umpire to build up experience of TV games if you're not getting that opportunity bilaterally. So I think that's a difficulty, and that's something that the ICC have maybe got to be a bit creative about. But I think that's one of the things that we are hitting up against. Anyway, thanks, Graham, for your questions. If anyone has questions, as always, do send them in. We try and pay attention to what people are chatting about, and address any questions that we get. Keep enjoying the World Cup, enjoy the last few matches, and let's see whether Sid's wacky prediction of a very unconvincing England winning this 50 over World Cup can somehow come true. Maybe it'll be me sitting here on camera next week eating my hat. Let's see. We will see you then. Bye for now.
Bye.